In late 2025, Iran's simmering tensions exploded into mass demonstrations as frustration and hope collided in the streets. The world watched as Iranians from all walks of life poured into city squares, their voices echoing through the night. These were the largest protests since 2022, shaking the Islamic Republic to its very core and sending shockwaves far beyond its borders. The sheer scale and intensity of the demonstrations caught even seasoned observers by surprise. The spark was economic hardship, soaring inflation, rampant unemployment, and the crushing weight of international sanctions drove citizens from small towns and sprawling cities alike into the streets. Everyday life had become a struggle, with families unable to afford basic necessities and businesses shuddering under financial strain. At first, these were desperate pleas for relief, not revolution. Shopkeepers, teachers, and retirees, once the backbone of Iranian society, protested rising food prices, unpaid wages, and government corruption. Their signs and chants reflected a longing for dignity and a return to normalcy. But beneath the surface, decades of frustration with the clerical regime fueled a deeper anger. Years of broken promises, political repression, and lack of opportunity had left scars that could no longer be hidden. The protests spread rapidly, uniting people across ethnic, religious, and class lines. What began as isolated outbursts soon transformed into a powerful national movement, as Iranians found common cause in their shared grievances. The government's dismissive response and swift deployment of security forces only intensified the unrest. Images of riot police clashing with demonstrators fueled anger and drew more people into the streets. What began as calls for economic justice quickly became demands for sweeping political and social change. Protesters now called for freedom, accountability, and an end to decades of oppression. Iran stood on the brink. The people's cry for dignity and freedom set the stage for a dramatic and potentially violent confrontation with the state, as the world waited to see what would come next. As security forces cracked down, the protests evolved from economic complaints to open calls for the end of the Islamic Republic. Chants shifted from bread and jobs to direct challenges against Supreme Leader Khamenei and the regime's legitimacy. For many, especially the youth, the crisis exposed a corrupt, unaccountable system stifling their future. The movement swelled, spreading to over 100 cities and towns, signaling a nationwide crisis of confidence. The authorities, caught off guard, failed to contain the unrest. Each crackdown only fueled more defiance. The government's inability to address core grievances, combined with its violence, pushed the movement past the point of no return. What began as pleas for help became a roar for fundamental change. The regime now faced an existential threat from a united, angry population. The government responded with overwhelming force and a near-total internet blackout, isolating protesters and hiding the crackdown from the world. Social media and global internet access vanished, leaving families cut off and rumors rampant. On the streets, Revolutionary Guards and Basiji militia unleashed live ammunition, tear gas, and mass arrests. Security forces fired into crowds, raided hospitals, and swept up thousands, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens alike. Prisons overflowed, and reports of torture and mistreatment mounted. The blackout and brutality aimed to break the protesters' will and decapitate the movement. Official sources admitted to thousands of arrests, but rights groups estimated up to 20,000 detained. The regime's message was clear: dissent would be crushed at any cost. Iran was plunged into fear and silence as the state tightened its grip. Supreme Leader Khamenei's televised address on January 17, 2026, marked a turning point. He ordered authorities to break the back of the seditionists. Framing the uprising as a foreign plot, he stripped protesters of legitimacy, labeling them agents of the West. Khamenei's rhetoric justified extreme violence, giving security forces a green light for escalation. In a rare admission, he referenced a few thousand deaths, but blamed the violence on foreign conspirators. This narrative absolved the regime of responsibility, painting itself as a victim. Dialogue was off the table. The crackdown intensified immediately after his speech. Security forces acted with impunity, determined to restore order at any cost. The regime's survival was now tied to the suppression of its own people. The stage was set for further bloodshed and repression. The true human cost of the crackdown remains shrouded in uncertainty, with a vast gap between official and independent figures. The government downplays fatalities, but Khamenei's mention of a few thousand hints at a catastrophe. Human rights groups have verified over 3,400 deaths, warning the real toll could be as high as 20,000. Some opposition sources claim even higher numbers, citing evidence of live ammunition and heavy weaponry. The number of arrests is equally disputed. Officials report 3,000, while rights groups estimate up to 20,000 detained. The regime has scapegoated minorities like the Baha'i, accusing them of fomenting unrest to deflect blame. Amid the fog of censorship, one fact is clear: a massacre of historic proportions has taken place. The regime's response has been to blame the unrest on foreign enemies, chiefly the United States and Israel. State media insist the protests were a foreign-orchestrated plot, not a genuine expression of public anger. Khamenei accused the U.S., even naming Donald Trump, of instigating violence and seeking regime change. Trump's social media threats and calls for new leadership were seized upon as proof of American interference. Tehran dismissed these claims, but used them to rally nationalist support and justify the crackdown. For the regime, foreign meddling is not just propaganda, it's a core part of their worldview. The protests are framed as another front in Iran's long struggle against its adversaries. Beneath the official narratives and government statements, a different story emerges, one told by those who witnessed the crackdown firsthand. These eyewitness accounts, often shared at great personal risk, reveal the true horror and chaos that unfolded in the streets. Smuggled testimonies describe peaceful citizens met with sudden, lethal force, thousands of bodies filling Tehran's mortuaries, families desperately searching for loved ones who vanished overnight. The pain and confusion are etched on the faces of those waiting outside hospitals and morgues, hoping for news, dreading the worst. Videos and secret recordings show security forces firing live ammunition into crowds, snipers positioned on rooftops as dusk falls, and wounded protesters being dragged through the streets by armed men. The brutality is systematic, designed to instill fear and crush any sign of resistance. Door-to-door raids and mass arrests have created a climate of terror that seeps into every home. Even sending a simple text message to check on a friend or share information is now a dangerous act, as surveillance intensifies and trust erodes. The digital trail left behind before the blackout is now being used to hunt down dissenters. Authorities track phone locations, monitor messages, and use every tool at their disposal to identify and silence those who dare to speak out. The internet shutdown has isolated Iranians, cutting them off from the world and from each other. Families sit in darkness, unable to reach loved ones or share their stories, while the outside world remains largely unaware of the full scale of the crisis. Yet, these first-hand stories, smuggled out in handwritten notes, whispered in secret interviews, or recorded on shaky phones, cut through the propaganda, exposing the true scale of state violence and the courage of those who refuse to be silenced. The trauma and fear are pervasive. No one feels safe, even in their own homes. Every knock at the door, every shadow in the hallway, is a reminder of the danger that now lurks everywhere. The regime's campaign has left a nation traumatized and silenced, but not broken. Beneath the silence, the stories of resistance and survival continue to echo, waiting for the world to listen. By January 18, 2026, the government declared victory. Streets were quiet, schools reopened, and exams rescheduled. On the surface, life in Tehran and other cities seemed to return to normal, with children filing back into classrooms and businesses cautiously opening their doors. The government's message was clear: order had been restored, and the crisis was over. But beneath this calm, a different reality lingers. A heavy security presence is everywhere. Soldiers and police patrol the streets, checkpoints dot neighborhoods, and surveillance is more intense than ever. Ongoing internet restrictions keep dissent in check, making it difficult for people to organize or even communicate freely. The core grievances, economic crisis, political repression, and lack of freedoms, remain unaddressed, simmering just below the surface. The regime offers no real concessions, only more repression and a barrage of conspiracy theories blaming foreign enemies for the unrest. Official statements paint a picture of stability, but the reality is far more complex and fraught with tension. The anger that fueled the uprising is not gone. It's simply been buried under layers of fear and exhaustion. The opposition is reeling from the crackdown, its leaders silenced or in hiding, and ordinary citizens are left to grapple with the consequences. Calls for renewed protests are met with uncertainty and fatigue. Thousands of detainees now face show trials, designed to intimidate and silence any further dissent. Families wait anxiously for news of their loved ones, while activists weigh the risks of speaking out. Iran sits on a powder keg. The quiet is fragile, and the sense of unease is palpable. The city's calm masks a deep tension, as if everyone is holding their breath, waiting for the next spark. Another eruption of anger is possible. The regime's iron-fisted tactics may have forced people off the streets for now, but the underlying issues have not disappeared. The government may have cleared the streets, but the sense of injustice and frustration remains. People remember what brought them out in protest, and those memories linger. In homes and cafes, families and friends quietly discuss what comes next. The underlying crisis persists, and the uncertainty of the future weighs heavily on everyone's minds. The potential for renewed unrest remains ever present. As long as the root causes are ignored, the storm may have passed, but its aftermath continues to shape the lives of millions. Iran stands at a crossroads. What began as a cry for relief became a direct challenge to the regime's survival. The state's answer was brutal suppression, sanctioned by the supreme leader and justified by conspiracy theories. The true scale of the massacre is hidden behind censorship, but the trauma is undeniable. The regime's legitimacy is shattered for many, even as it clings to power through force. The international community watches, but ordinary Iranians bear the cost, isolated, grieving, and angry. The enforced silence is not stability, but a sign of deep wounds and unresolved conflict. The struggle for Iran's future is far from over. The quiet on the streets is only a pause in a long, painful fight.